from the laptop to these speakers to these into that.
Got it. So which of the two microphones is it going through?
This one is that.
Uh-huh.
Maybe it'll see a little better from over here, and this
Okay.
one goes to that.
Okay, so one mic can only feed into one of the speakers, so you have two.
Oh, yes, it'll actually feed in, and I'm going to turn these off for now. It'll actually feed go ahead and get in the live stream.
Testing. Testing. Some of my slides have a video clip.
Okay.
So when you play,
Yes. And I can turn on that microphone for that.
Let's go ahead and do it now.
Not that one. Well, actually, maybe that one's on.
Okay.
All right. They're already good. Good to go. I could click play.
Second time, then the video will play.
Corona.
My name only, but
Oh, you.
should have finished doing the whole thing.
You're just here for moral support.
I'm just here for moral support.
And just like,
Lending a hand while it's not my field, you know. So
oh gosh, you really got scared away from music participation.
who did?
I said you really got scared away from that. Gosh, okay.
Oh, they basically told to get the car.
Tell me what to do.
Yeah. Am I good?
Anyway, yeah. I'm good. Should I make some noise? Oh, what's the capacity? Oh, I knew this at one point, and now I forgot. It's not quite that many, but it's a little over 100, I think. Okay. Okay.
More people are trickling in, but I think we're just going to go ahead and
Go ahead and get started.
We're about 12 minutes past.
Okay. Should I encourage people to move down to make room in the back?
I think that'd be a nice little announcement.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hello. Good morning. Hello. Hi, everybody. We're going to be starting here in just a second. If we could, there are going to be a few folks joining us in a couple minutes, so if you can sort of move a little bit forward, a couple of the folks in the back, and make some room for our late arrivals, that would be lovely. Okay, so without any further ado, hello and welcome. My name is Daniel Suslak. I'm an associate professor of anthropology here at Indiana University. And it is my pleasure to introduce our next keynote speaker, Dr. K. David Harrison. David is currently Vice Provost at Vinh University in Hanoi, Vietnam, after teaching for many years at Swarthmore and serving as an Associate Provost for academic programs there. David co-directs the National Geographic Society's Enduring Voices program, whose mission is to promote the documentation, maintenance, preservation, and revitalization of endangered languages worldwide through linguist-aided, community-driven multimedia documentation. Many people, of course, also know him from his star turn in the 2008 documentary film The Linguists. David has published a number of important scholarly works on Turkic languages, including his year 2000 Yale doctoral dissertation on Tuvan phonology and morphology. And in recent years has conducted linguistic fieldwork across Asia and the Pacific, research that has been generously supported by the National Geographic Society, the NEH, the National Science Foundation, Microsoft, and other generous supporters. In a lot of his most recent work, indigenous environmental knowledge systems have emerged as a key theme, one which he'll be discussing today. David and his collaborators have researched a range of cases from Winlore in southern Vanuatu to the Agency of Plants and Forests in the Central Highlands of Vietnam. In 2023, he published an important annual review article on the growing field of environmental linguistics, which centers local perspectives that link land with language and helps promote the values that may offer our best hope to confront the challenges of climate change. Please join me in a warm welcome to Dr. David Harrison.
Thank you, Daniel, for that beautiful introduction. I'm so happy to be here, happy to meet many of you, and I'm very excited about this inaugural conference. I cannot imagine a better place for such a conference to take place. As you probably know, Indiana University is famous for less commonly taught languages. You can take 100 languages here, I'm told, and I was speaking to one of your students, and she said she was having a very difficult time making up her mind which languages to learn. So I'm going to be talking about indigenous and endangered languages today, and Shanae will be assisting me with the PowerPoint slides. So I want to say a little bit first about my positionality, because I am not an indigenous person, but for the past 25 years or so, I've had the great privilege of visiting, living with, learning from indigenous people around the world. And this has been a transformative experience for me, both as a person and as a scientist. And whatever I have accomplished in my scientific research, it is only because of the generosity and the kindness of people who are willing to share their cultures with me and willing to let me help provide a platform for their languages and cultures. In the 25 years I've been doing this work, one thing has never changed. Can you guess what that is? Yes, thank you. The brilliance of indigenous people, thank you. I am in awe of that, and that's what I've devoted my research career to. I was going to say, it's kind of frivolous, but I was going to say my haircut has not changed in 25 years. But another thing that has not changed is my methodology. So my methodology is standard in anthropology, which is participant observation, I live in the culture, I participate in as many activities as they will allow me to do. I take notes, I take digital audio and video recordings, photographs, and it's very people-centric research. So I just wanted to include some photos of me doing my research so you know where the information that I'm going to present you today, where it's coming from. And as I said, it's due to the kindness and generosity of people who have been willing to share their cultures with me. So in thinking about endangered and indigenous languages, I'd like to start by teaching all of you a word in an endangered language. So could you please say with me, kaplaya? Turn to your neighbor, say kaplaya. So you have just greeted each other in the very endangered Koro Aka language, which is spoken in Northeast India. And I would like to play a little video clip of Abamu Degio singing in the language so you can get a sense of what it sounds like. Ethan is going to rescue us. Thank you, Ethan. So Koro, which you just heard, represents just a tiny fraction of the linguistic diversity in the world. If you look at the ethnologue, it lists something like 7,100 some language. The number keeps changing. And we estimate that approximately half of the languages spoken today may go extinct in this century. So this explains why people who speak and own these languages, or people who study these languages like myself, feel a sense of urgency. The world's linguistic diversity is very unevenly distributed, both geographically and demographically. So if you look at the 85 big languages in the world, I think you could probably learn every one of them at this university. They represent about 79% of the world's population. Then we have a group of about 3,000 medium-sized languages. That's about 21% of the world's population. Then we have the majority of the world's languages, more than 3,500, and they're spoken by just 0.1% of the world's population. And this is an accelerating trend. So as I said, it helps explain why people who work with or speak these languages feel a sense of urgency. Many people have wondered or asked whether language extinction is like species extinction, right? It's not the same, of course, but these are parallel extinction processes. And I would like to point out a couple of ways in which they are connected to each other. So first of all, I'll just say that languages are much more endangered than species. Secondly, I will say that we are in a similar state of scientific documentation with respect to languages as we are to species. What do I mean by that? If you talk to a biologist, they would tell you that something like 80% of the plants that exist in the world have not yet been scientifically identified and taxonomized by science. And with languages, it's hard to get an exact figure, but I think that we probably don't have an adequate scientific documentation of more than 20% of the world's languages. So our state of knowledge with respect to both is very low. And the third way in which they're connected, when I said that these species are not known to science, it doesn't mean they're not known to people. And so it turns out that most of the knowledge about species, plant and animal species in the world, is knowledge that is not found in scientific databases. It is found only in small indigenous languages. So there's a deep connection between species diversity, species extinction, and language diversity and language extinction. You don't have to take my word for it, though. In my travels, I meet many knowledgeable people, and they exemplify this language biodiversity connection. So you could talk to Hilarion Zamos Condori in Bolivia. He's a speaker of Kalawaya. He can name more than 1,200 medicinal plants that the Kalawaya use for healing. You can talk to Anselon Seru, a speaker of Futuna in Vanuatu. He can name 250 species of fish that swim around his island. So the environmental knowledge is very rich, and it is very localized in small and endangered languages. A few years ago, working with the linguist Greg Anderson, we created the concept of the language hotspot. And we published a version of the language hotspots map in National Geographic magazine. This version has 13 hotspots on it. There's probably many more. We have about 24 or 25 on our list now. A language hotspot has three characteristics. First of all, it has a very high diversity of languages. Secondly, it has low documentation of languages. Many of the languages in a hotspot have not been recorded or documented. And thirdly, second is high levels of endangerment. So it has high diversity, high endangerment, low documentation. And with my colleagues and with support from National Geographic, I've been visiting as many of the language hotspots as possible, meeting with some of the last speakers of the most endangered languages, and recording information that they choose to share with us. So today I would like to invite you to join me on a virtual tour of some language hotspots. We will start in Siberia, we will go to Melanesia, we will go to Mexico, and we will come back to India at the end, which is where we started. In each of those locations, you will see different scenarios for language endangerment and loss, and you will see different strategies for language survival. I'm going to start with a place that's very dear to my heart, Tuva. I spent a year in Tuva living with nomadic yak herders to write my PhD dissertation, which Daniel mentioned. This is me doing my Tuvan work. It was a wonderful experience, but I have no useful skills in a nomadic society. So my host family assigned me the very important job of collecting yak dung, right? I was literally a shit collector. I would go out every day, follow the yaks, and there's a whole process to it. So you have to follow the yaks, you find the manure, you mash it down with a special tool, you leave it there. Then you come back 2 or 3 days later and you flip it over so that it can dry on the other side. Then you come back sometime later wearing a special basket, you load it up, you bring it back to the yurt, you stack it up in a particular way. After it's dried and processed, it becomes something that's not considered dirty at all. You can bring it inside the yurt, burn it in the stove so you can heat your tea or your meal. And what I had a page in my notebook called 100 Words for Shit, because they had different names for this product at different stages of its metamorphosis. And so through this very humble task of collecting yak manure, I began to appreciate the richness of the lexicon. The best introduction I could give you to Tuvan culture is the ancient art of Tuvan throat singing, or overtone singing. So I would like to play for you now a little clip of this young man named Murat performing. So you hear that, the high-pitched ringing sound. That is coming from his vocal tract. Now, Tuvans have the same vocal tract that you and I have, and they say that anyone can learn this art. I tried it. I got a sore throat trying it. I can't do it, but there are many YouTube videos that will teach you how to do Tuvan throat singing, or attempt to teach you. So I couldn't do the throat singing, but I became interested in the lyrics to the songs. That's a good entree into any language and culture. And that was a Tuvan love song that he was singing. And a typical line in a Tuvan love song is, "My liver aches, my liver aches." So what in the context of a love song does "my liver aches" mean? Anyone? Feeling lovesick, heartache, yes. Yes, Tuvans believe that emotions and love reside in the liver, right? So, of course, we know that this is not correct. Love resides in the... Okay, but would you send someone on Valentine's Day a picture of your brain? Maybe not, right? So we have a different cultural metaphor for where emotion resides. Both the Tuvan metaphor, liver, and our metaphor, heart, are biologically false. But they are very powerful metaphors, and they shape how we think about emotion. Another interesting dilemma I had in Tuvan was learning how to say go. This seems like a basic verb that you should learn on day one when you're learning a language by immersion. But Tuvans have 5 different words for go. And I would try out different words, and they would either laugh at me or correct me, but they couldn't explain to me how to make the right choice. So in order to say go in Tuvan, you need to know the location of the nearest river to where you are. So some of you who live here in Bloomington, please point for me. Where is the nearest river? Okay, and thank you, Ethan. And what is the direction that the current is flowing in that river?
I believe it's going west.
So, okay, so we need to know that, and then we choose a verb that says we're going with the current, against the current, or across the current. Plus, we can specify whether we're going on foot or by some means of locomotion. So in order to say go in Tuvan, you need to know all that about the landscape. And if you are going somewhere in Tuvan, let's say you're going on a journey, it is customary to consult a shaman or a shamaness to see if it's a good day to travel. They will tell you the appropriate omens for traveling or staying home. And when I talked with shamans, I heard them using some unusual or interesting words to describe time. When they talk about the future, when they talk about the past, they use body part metaphors relating to the nose and the forehead. And when they talk about the future, they use a different set of body part metaphors relating to the spine and the scapula. And it took me a while to figure this out. Tuvans view the past as located in front of you. You can see the past. You are aware of the past. The future is sneaking up behind you. It's going to surprise you. You can never see it. And so you cannot say in Tuvan, I'm looking forward to next week. You're looking forward to last week. Next week is behind you, right? So they've taken what we think of as a very normal, natural space-time metaphor, and they've reversed it, and this is how they think about time. Eventually, I was promoted from yak manure collector to assistant goat herd, and this requires a different set of skills. This is my host family, Nyama, with 2 of her children. We spent a lot of time out with the goats, which is their source of income and wealth. And I'm going to play for you in the next slide a little clip where they're teaching me some of the 42 different words they have to identify the colors and patterns of goats. Any of you who know a Turkic language will hear some familiar words in this next clip.
Bo kara kalcan şu.
Kara kalcan.
Bo kara kalcan. Bo sarı kuşku.
Sarı kuşku.
Bu akaydı kardeşim.
Bo
Akaydı kızmışım.
akaydı kızlı şu.
Akaylık kızıl kuşku.
Ha.
So what I understood is that this is not just a lexicon or a taxonomy. This is a technology. This is a survival technology. If you own 400 goats, this linguistic technology allows you to look out at your goats and very efficiently identify individual goats that you may wish to talk about. So this is the kind of system that is very common and prevalent, not only in Tuvan, but in many other languages. So I was trained in classical linguistic theory, and we have kind of a conceit in the field of linguistics that if you want to know the grammar of a language or you want to write a description of the grammar of a language, all you need is a speaker, and you can sit in a room with the speaker and you can ask them questions, right? This is what we call elicitation. Some people call it field methods even. You can ask them questions, and by asking the right questions, you can figure out the grammar of the language. This turns out to be completely false based on my experience. You cannot understand the grammar of Tuvan unless you are in the Tuvan landscape, moving through the landscape, experiencing the landscape. You cannot document the grammar of the language. So this was a revelation for me, and it's something that I've carried forward into all my work. So lessons from Tuvan. Language is not contained within the brain. It is capacious. It spills out of the brain, it spills out of the mind, and it encompasses rivers, landscapes, time and space. You cannot localize language in the brain. And the knowledge base, things that we don't know, like the classification system for goats, is vast, but it is also vulnerable. Next. Okay, so we've been in Tuva in the middle of Siberia, a very cold place. I would like to bring you now to Melanesia, a very warm place, to Vanuatu. I'm very excited to begin work in Vanuatu about 10 years ago. It's the #1 language hotspot. It has a population of 335,000 people speaking 113 languages, right? And multilingualism is the norm in Vanuatu, so it's a very rich linguistic environment. I've been part of a project together with botanists from the New York Botanical Garden called Plants Mo People Belong Vanuatu. This is a typical scene in our daily work. So the botanists have been out collecting plants for several hours. They bring the plants back to the village, they lay them out on this tarp, and then we consult with the experts, in this case Takaronga Kuautonga, who told us as soon as we arrived on the island, he said, "Oh, you're here to collect plants. We have names for all our plants." So he put us on notice. Many of these plants were not known to botanical science, but they're known to the local people. This is just one example of how the languages make finer distinctions than are made in large world languages. So they have different types of ferns on this island. In Bislama, the national language, they just refer to all of them as bush cabbage, but in the local languages, they have different names for them because they have different purposes and uses. And knowledge of plants is not just a hobby in Vanuatu. It's about your survival. They often suffer from cyclones, and when a cyclone is coming, everyone on the islands knows that you have to leave the modern structures made out of brick and metal and glass, and you have to go into a traditional house. They even call it a cyclone house. This house will withstand a cyclone. You will be safe if you stay in this house. So knowledge of plants, and it takes about 20 different plants to build this house, and knowledge of where to collect them, how to process them. Knowledge of those plants is crucial to survival. Go ahead, skip. Skip, yep. Back. Another thing that impressed me is that these are oral cultures. Oral cultures are often thought of as deficient by people in literate cultures. Nothing could be further from the truth. People in oral cultures can perform prodigious feats of memory that you and I cannot even understand how they're done. They can tell an epic tale with 10,000 lines, right? In Vanuatu, they like to play a variety of games like this one, which require very complex mathematical calculations and thinking, and also incredible amounts of memory. And they're very good at it. Even children are good at it. Fishing is also very important in the life of these communities. They live off the ocean. They're very nature-centric, ocean-centric cultures. This is Anselon Saru, who can name 250 species of fish. And he told me an interesting story about when they catch a tuna fish. When they catch a tuna fish, they celebrate this occasion by dancing and singing. So I would like to play for you the celebratory song performed on Futuna Island when they catch a tuna fish. Go ahead. So the next time you eat a tuna sandwich, I would like you to think about the joy and celebration that people experience when catching a tuna fish. It's different than buying it from the grocery store. And this song that they sing is also a botanical map of the island. There are 4 parts to the song. When they are out at sea in the canoes and they've caught the tuna fish, they begin singing the first part of this song. And in it, they mention a certain type of fruit, pandanus fruit, which falls into the ocean and floats out on the sea. The second stanza of the song is sung when they arrive at the beach and they're unloading the canoes, and it mentions this flowering vine that grows on the beach. The third part of the song is sung when they're on the pathway from the beach up to the village, and it mentions a bush that grows along the pathway. And at this time, the people up in the village can hear them singing the tuna song, and so they begin preparing for a feast. The final stanza of the song is sung when they're up in the village, dividing the fish among different people who are going to eat it, and it mentions the banyan tree which grows in the village. So this is a botanical map. It's got a lot of environmental knowledge packed into it, and it's about fish. Now, the fishermen themselves, Anselon, is not allowed to eat this fish, not even a single bite. He's only allowed as a fisherman to eat the smaller and less tasty fish. And this is part of the social compact. It's a survival skill. The fishermen provide sustenance for the community, but they do not partake in the best catch. So what happens if you've caught a beautiful tuna fish and you are not allowed to eat it? Well, he puts it on his social media, of course. Where else would it go? He has a wonderful collection. And you're laughing because you didn't expect people on a remote island in Vanuatu to be on Instagram, but of course they are. Of course they are. And they're on Facebook too. And so they're adopting digital technologies that they want to adopt, while at the same time maintaining traditional customs, which is something I greatly admire about this culture. Many of those fish photographs and names also went into the talking dictionary, which we created for this language. They are voiced by the actual people, so Anselon Saru is not only a person who catches fish, he is the co-author of the talking dictionary of Futuna. And this is a scene where we're making the recordings and sorting out some of the different names for fish and the lexicon. I asked Anselon a simple question because he told me that sometimes he goes away for many hours. He could be out sailing in his canoe for 8 hours, 12 hours. The island is out of sight at this point. So I asked him a very simple question. How do you get home again? How do you get home again? There's no instrumentation. He doesn't have a compass or anything like that. And he began to explain to me that they have a very complex system of winds. Next. He's monitoring the whole environment with all of his senses, but particularly he's paying attention to something called the wind compass, which is a set of 17 named directional winds that blow in different locations around the island, and each one anchors to a home point on the island. So mastering this system, again, it's a linguistic system, but it's also crucial for survival. This system, too, is very much endangered. I sat down with some of the elders who sketched it out for me, and it turned out that the younger people, even though they do go out sailing, they're beginning to lose or forget or not learn this crucial system of the wind compass. So through our work, we've been able to help revitalize this system and make it available for everyone. So lessons from Vanuatu is that languages are not just, they don't just have communicative value or aesthetic value. Languages have survival value for many people in many places. And island cultures are quite unique. They have their own special attributes, and they're also very much on the front lines of experiencing climate change. And as I said before, what I admire about Vanuatu cultures is that they adopt outside technologies when they want them, but they do not supplant or replace their traditional knowledge systems. They bring them together in a very interesting hybrid. Next. Okay, so we've been in Siberia, we've been in Melanesia. We're going to go now to Mexico, to Oaxaca, to look at Zapotec language, identity, and power. Anyone speak or work on Zapotec here? Excellent. Welcome. Okay. Next. So I was very fortunate to have funding from the NSF and to bring colleagues and students to Oaxaca several years in a row. We've been working on various cultural documentation projects and building talking dictionaries for, I think, 6 or 7 different pueblos in Oaxaca state. Oaxaca is absolutely a language hotspot. It's really hard to say even how many Zapotec languages there are. It's a very large number, and I'll tell you why in a minute. We spend a lot of time in the gardens. It's a very plant-centric culture. Moises Garcia Guzman is one of our teachers. He spent a lot of time explaining plants and plant knowledge to us. And we also spend a lot of time with the family Santiago, who are multi-generational textile artists and weavers. And what I learned from them is they don't just think of their textiles as a symbol of their culture or as a metaphor for their culture. For them, the textiles actually are Zapotec culture, and they weave together the landscape, the natural environment, plants, animals, the language, poetry, song, and aesthetics. So the textiles that they produce, if you hold a Oaxacan textiles in your hands, you're actually holding the culture and the language, and not in a metaphorical sense, in a very real sense. And Janet Chavez Santiago, who's a member of the famous weaving family, is also a lexicographer, and she has been building the Zapotec Talking Dictionary. One of the things we discovered in working with Zapotec is that each pueblo, even though it may only be 5 miles from the next pueblo, has its own distinct variety of spoken Zapotec. And so we thought at the beginning of this project, we thought we would make a Zapotec talking dictionary. That is impossible. Each pueblo that we worked with wanted their own dictionary with the name of their pueblo on it, and they wanted to highlight the minor differences between the varieties. So identity is highly local, linguistic identity is highly local in this community. This is an example of the San Bartolome Quialana variety of Zapotec with natural and cultural artifacts from their pueblo, from their village. I met a fascinating character named Renato Hernandez. Renato is blind, and he has been blind all his life. He has a very happy disposition. I asked him to teach me some words of Zapotec, and he said, sure, no problem. Do you know the names of birds? And I said, no, I don't know bird names. So he spent about half an hour teaching me the names of birds in his language. He has never seen any of these birds. He knows them by their sound. But he had the entire avian taxonomy in his head, and he loves listening to the birds. This is another sample from the Talking Dictionary. You can, in addition to lexical entries and sound files, you can upload videos to the dictionary, and you can even upload tweets. The Zapotecs are fond of formerly Twitter, and they like to tweet in their language. So we have many Zapotec tweets in the Talking Dictionary. Another feature is that I said there were minor differences among the pueblos, so we have a compare and contrast function, so you can look side by side. You can juxtapose the word for guava, for example, from the different pueblos, and you can see the subtle differences, or maybe not so subtle differences. Zapotec language is very much a matter of power, and it's a matter of resistance. Speaking the Zapotec language is an act of political resistance. And I'm happy to say that this is recognized at least some level within the local and the state government. We had a press conference to launch the Talking Dictionaries, and it was sponsored by the Commission of Human Rights for Oaxaca because they recognize that knowledge of one's heritage language is a human right. And I would like to play a short video clip by Moises Garcia Guzman where he talks about his purpose as a Zapotec language activist and the Talking Dictionary.
Hi, my name is Moises Garcia Guzman. I am the activist here in Tlacochahuaya, and we are working with talking dictionaries that are to us an absolute jewel because we are experiencing some language loss. In some cases, it's pretty dramatic, but this is the perfect tool. And I am deeply thankful to this team that comes to work with us because through documentation, we are saving our language. We are saving our identity. Thank you very much for coming. And this is the best tool that we could ever have to save our language.
So lessons from Zapotec. Language identity, it can be highly localized, in this case at the level of pueblo, individual village. Next. Language is a human right, as I mentioned, and they very much view it this way, and as a form of political resistance. And language is also a program for biodiversity conservation. It's built into the language in many ways. I could go into more detail in the Q&A. Okay, so we've been in Siberia, we've been in Melanesia, we've been in Mesoamerica, and we're going to come back now to India, where we began our journey, and look at Koro. Can you remember how to say hello in Koro Aka? Kaplaya, yes, let's say it all again. Kaplaya. Thank you. I refer to Koro Aka as a hidden language, and I will explain why in a minute. It's spoken in the extreme northeast part of India, along the border with Bhutan. It is a subsistence culture. The people in this culture hunt animals. They gather plants in the forest. They grow oranges and rice. So it's very much an agrarian subsistence culture. They weave their own textiles. They build all of their own architecture and houses. They produce many things themselves. This is Abamudegyo, who was singing to us at the beginning. And our National Geographic photographer, Chris Rainier, took a formal portrait of her. It was published in National Geographic magazine, and we brought the picture back to her and said, "Thank you for sharing your culture with the world." It was a very moving experience for her. One of the things that has protected the Koro Aka language up to now is its isolation. It's spoken in 6 villages. Some of them cannot be reached by road, but of course, it's also spoken in India, which is one of the most technologically forward countries in the world, and young people from these communities are migrating down to the cities for opportunities, and so they're very much connected to the rest of the world, even though they're also somewhat isolated. Originally, my colleagues and I, Greg Anderson and Ganesh Murmu, had gone to this area to document another language, a language called Russo Aka. And we had been working on Russo Aka for about a week, making lots of recordings. And some of the speakers said to us, "Have you heard the other dialect of our language? Have you heard the other dialect?" And we said, "No, we haven't heard it." And they said, "Well, go down to Kadaya village, and when you get there, you'll hear the other dialect of our language. It's just a little different, just a little different." So off we went to listen to Koro Aka, what we had been told was a dialect, and we made the first ever recordings of this language. Next. I'm going to control the slides for just a minute. So I want to give you a sentence in Russo Aka, the language that we've been working on, and please try to repeat this after you hear it. Okay, we're all going to say it together.
He, vu, gyu, zi.
Okay. He, vu, gyu, zi. Okay, so that's Russo Aka. This is how you say these 3 black pigs. Here's the same sentence in Koro Aka.
Ti lele makala.
So you don't need a PhD in linguistics to understand these are not dialects. They're as different from each other as English and Japanese. They're completely different. Locally, though, they're perceived as just being a dialect, and also at the state level in India, they're not recognized as separate languages. And also at the national level in India, if you look at the Linguistic Survey of India, which is very thorough, but does not count groups smaller than 10,000, it is not listed or recognized as a separate language. So it was only after our documentation of the language we were able to scientifically establish and confirm that, yes, this is a completely separate and unique language, and so we can add 1 to the number of languages spoken in the world. That's why I call it a hidden language. The Koro Aka people also have a very clear and a very thoughtful agenda and rationale for saving their language. And I would like you to hear it directly from Anthony Deggio, one of the speakers.
It's me, Anthony Deggio. I'm an Indian speaker of Koro Aka language. I would like to say some few points about the Koro language. Why this Koro language is going on in extinct. Most of the families to send their childhood outside the village to study for further higher study. And when they come back to the village, they don't know how to speak the language, mother tongue. When a young girl or young man, a young boy could not speak a Koro language properly, and people used to mock at them. So it is a saying that loss of culture is loss of identity. That means if we lose our culture, then suddenly we are losing our identity. So we must continue our Koro language, continue our this traditional customs and languages, and follow the ancient our forefathers' teachings.
So I think this is a very powerful statement about why this language should be valued, why it should be protected, and why it should survive. And Anthony said that it connects him to his ancestors, it is his identity, and he is also giving his linguistic autobiography in this statement. He is one of those children who was sent away to a distant city for his education at a very young age, probably 7 or so. In the city, he was well cared for, lived in a boarding school, but he did not have opportunity to speak his language. And when he came back to his village several years later, he didn't speak the language perfectly. People mocked him, and he began to lose his confidence and stop using the language. He speaks 5 other languages. So maybe it wasn't such a big deal, but then he is able to articulate why he values his language particularly and why it should be preserved. So I think this is a very powerful statement, and I fully endorse it and understand it. Also, within the Koro Aka community, we met a number of people who are strategically working to save the language. This is a young man, Sange Degio. Because of my affiliation with National Geographic, I often get to have a National Geographic photographer accompany me on my linguistic field trips, and they do such beautiful work. This photo is by Chris Rainier. But they like to photograph people kind of frozen in time a little bit. You know, they like to emphasize the exotic nature of people. And Sange does dress like this, and he does have a golden crown, a silver crown and beads. And he is the 38th child of his father and 7 wives, who was the most important family in the village. So he does have a high social position, as indicated. But you would only see him dressed like this twice a year during the rice harvest ceremony. So I asked my photographer, Chris Rainier, I said, okay, you've taken a cultural portrait of him. Now please photograph him in his everyday appearance. So this is, he's a young entrepreneur, a businessman, he's a global citizen, he speaks 5 languages, you know, he has all of those things. He's not some kind of cultural icon frozen in time. But at the same time, he is an exemplar and a representative of his culture. And he and his colleague, Kandu Degio, on the right, they have come up with a brilliant strategy for saving their language, which I would like you to hear. So you'll recognize the genre, yes, that's excellent. Of course, you recognize the genre. You know, hip-hop has been borrowed all around the world. I have many recordings of hip-hop in indigenous and endangered languages. And oftentimes, it preserves its quality as a protest genre, even when being performed in indigenous and endangered languages. This is not a protest song. This is a little song about hot chili peppers and romance. And it's a genre that is somewhat disapproved by the elders in the community. And so what could make it more cool for the 5- and 6-year-olds who have the agency and the autonomy to decide whether to keep or abandon their language? So these 2 young men are literally saving their language through original hip-hop. They speak 5 other languages. They could easily have abandoned the Koro Aka language. But they decided not only to keep it, but to do something creative and virtuosic with it so that it would appeal to the next generation. So this is how you save a language. And the Koro Aka community also very generously, a few years ago, agreed to travel to the US, to Washington, D.C., for the Smithsonian Folklife Cultural Festival, which takes place every July on the National Mall. And in the space of 10 days, they presented their culture to more than 1 million visitors to the Folklife Festival. So lessons from Koro Aka, the hidden language in Northeast India. We still don't know how many languages there are in the world, and even though we are in the midst of a language extinction event, the number of listed languages is going to continue to increase as they're noticed by outsiders. What's the difference between a language and a dialect? When I give public lectures around the US, this is the #1 audience question. I don't know why. People are vexed by this question. What's the difference between a language and a dialect? I can't answer the question except to say that it's socially constructed as well as linguistically constructed. But if you want to know if something's a language or a dialect, you can always ask local people. And this is a case where there are differing opinions. The local people are saying it's just a dialect, and the scientists are saying, but it sure looks like a language, right? So we have 2 views on this. And I want to emphasize the beneficial effects of globalization. We hear a lot about the negative effects of globalization. Here is a small language that was never previously heard outside of a few remote villages in the Himalayas. It now has a global platform and a global audience. We cannot support small languages, we cannot care about small languages if we don't know about them. And so this is an opportunity to know about this language. They now have a global audience and people care about the language. So all of the people I presented you today are what I would like to call language warriors. I did not invent this term. I'm very gratefully borrowing it from Delphine Redshirt, who is a Lakota language warrior here in the US. But I think it's an apt term because all of the people I presented today are taking decisive, strategic actions to rescue and save their languages. So I call them language warriors. And what is the value of language diversity? I don't think that's a question that I need to pose to this audience or at Indiana University, which probably values languages more than any other university in the world. But this is a question that we have to answer for society at large. We live in a society that does not generally value languages, where bilingualism is seen as suspect, and many people have intense anxiety that Spanish is somehow encroaching upon English, right? And that English may become an endangered language, right? I hear this all the time. So we have to be able to answer as concerned scientists, as advocates, as activists. We have to be able to decisively explain to people what is the value of language diversity. Today, I've given you some evidence and some arguments. Different languages provide different pathways of thinking, different technologies for survival, different ways of viewing the environment, of human emotions, different understandings, right? All of these things are valuable. They contribute to human survival, and they contribute to the richness of our cultures. So we should all come together and value all the languages of the world. And I will say kaplaya once again, which also means thank you. So I managed to finish my talk exactly at 12 o'clock, but Professor Serafin said that I can take up a little tiny bit of your lunchtime for Q&A. So I understand if some people have to leave, but I'll do a Q&A for a few minutes, and I'm just going to rely on my colleagues to pass the microphone. Thank you. From Kurdistan, yes, your question.
Thank you for such a great presentation. Thanks a lot. I'm asking about the language and dialect problem. You just created a new language for them while they still believe it is a dialect. So is it not a westernized belief? Because why we cannot do the same, for example, with German? Bavarian and Standard German are not mutually intelligible, and they don't understand each other. But because Germany is in the West, so it is still one language. But whenever it is about indigenous languages, and Kurdish happens a lot, these kind of things. So you find different sentences, and at the end, like dividing them might lead to, some negative impact and leave some negative impact on those communities.
Yes.
So this is my question.
I very much appreciate the question, and I know that coming from a Kurdish perspective, where you have Kurmanji Kurdish and Sorani Kurdish and many Kurdishes, right? And it's a dialect continuum. I want to point out that this is a slightly different case. So this is not a dialect continuum. And I think the reason that local people called it a dialect when they were speaking English, right? Or when they were speaking Hindi, which just borrows the word dialect, so you're stuck with the word dialect again, right? It actually, in the context of India, this demotes the language. It relegates the language to a low social status, not really worthy of attention. So in their own languages, right, they use the word language. If they're speaking Kora Aka, they have a word for language. They don't have a word for dialect. So I think the name that they call it themselves is language. It's just these external systems, as you pointed out, have said, well, we have this concept of dialect. And so they borrowed the concept of dialect from English. and they applied it in this case. What we were able to do by creating a talking dictionary of Koro Aka, by creating a video collection of a corpus, right, we're able to let them know that from a scientific point of view, it has all of the qualities of a language, right? So if they want to call it a language, that's actually closer to the scientific reality. We're not telling them that they have to call it a language or a dialect. It's up to them. But it provided, I think, some validation and some recognition. So now it's internationally recognized and known to people, whereas before it was, no one had heard of it. So that's the attempt. Yeah. Yes. Who's handling the microphones? Yes. I think we need to get a microphone to you. Thank you. I want to thank our illustrious Indiana University Redcoats.
Hi, thanks for the presentation. I have a question. So after your research, have you followed all the communities and see how the language have enhanced and have progressed? And if you said is in danger of being
as
lost.
much as possible. So I keep in contact with these communities. We maintain the talking dictionaries from Swarthmore College. From every community that I've worked with, I have also, because I don't like to just do like a field trip or an expedition, I do reciprocal exchanges. So every community that I have ever worked with, and especially if I've had grant funding, a reciprocal visit by them is always part of the program. So I've brought Koro community members to the US. I've brought people from Vanuatu to the US. So I believe in reciprocity. And obviously it's a long-term commitment. I can't do it all myself. I bring colleagues, I bring students. Some of the students who first came to Mexico or to Vanuatu with me as an undergraduate student have gone on, gotten their PhDs, written their doctoral thesis on these languages, engaged in. So I'm cultivating those relationships and appreciate the importance of it. Yeah, it's a long-term. You can't. Language reclamation, language revitalization, is a lifetime commitment, and it's not something that happens quickly because the forces of globalization are quite powerful, and so it has to be a continuous effort. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your wonderful presentation. I'm a linguist, so I see a lot of common points and discussions that come across when we take courses, when we study languages. But there is an interesting thing that you've mentioned when you're speaking of one of the ways that the young generation somehow is trying to preserve the language by singing hip-hop. And you said that maybe the ancestors or the older generations might not look at this way as a perfect way. So I was wondering if you've noticed some differences in terms of the use, in terms of the emblems of identity construction and showing between the older generations and the younger generations, and to what extent those are important, those shifts are important, because we're talking about change in terms of linguistics, identity, dialect language. The other thing is, and I hope I'll be able to...
Can I answer that first question?
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm afraid I'll forget it. It was very complex. So you talked about usage and identity. So usage, there are definitely generational differences in usage. This is true of any language. An interesting observation first made by Nancy Dorian about Gaelic, an interesting observation about extreme endangered languages. Even if you only have a very tiny community of speakers, like 10 speakers, the language is continuing to change and evolve. It doesn't stop, it doesn't slow down. So languages change right up to the minute that they're not spoken anymore. So that's the usage. As far as the identity part, I look to community members, how do they articulate language as part of their identity? That's why I was so impressed to hear from Anthony. I think he was maybe 22 at the time that I filmed that clip. To hear Anthony say, that loss of language and culture is loss of identity. Right? I was impressed and surprised to hear basically a young generation person articulating that point. So yes, but of course there are always huge generational differences. I hope I
Maybe I would allow someone else to take it.
Thank you.
My name is Mark Tripura, Tripura indigenous tribe from Bangladesh, all the way from the jungle. So my language is called Kaubrung. So they never have written that one. It's oral language. So recently I put in the writing alphabet. So now I'm developing it. So I also publishing the book with it. So, but the people who are blind and who mostly older people, they're illiterate, they cannot read. So for them, you're talking about the talking dictionaries. I'm interested about it. How can I do that? Because many people want to understand. Oh, they understand when they hear, but they cannot read. That was a very kind of thought-provoking for me. How can I reach to them with this new language?
Thank you. Yeah. That's an excellent question. I want to address the question of orality versus literacy and also the question of accessibility to a technology platform like the Talking Dictionary for people who do not read. So as to the first point, most of the world's languages do not make use of literacy or only in a very limited fashion. So it is actually the natural state of languages not to be written down. Writing is a late adopted technology. Once you get it, it's very useful, but there's a trade-off. There's a cost to adopting literacy. You lose your memory. I cannot even memorize a telephone number anymore. I have to immediately offload it into my external brain, right? People in oral cultures can perform prodigious feats of memorization and recitation that are unimaginable to people from literate cultures. We can't even understand cognitively how they're doing it, right? So orality is something quite special. It's also the norm. I want to congratulate you on creating a writing system for your language. This is how it should be done, in my opinion. And we know in the past colonial history of anthropology and linguistics and missionary proselytization, many communities in the world have a writing system that was delivered to them by missionaries or linguists or missionary linguists. And it's not necessarily suitable for them. This is why you have orthography wars in many small language communities, because different external actors at different times introduce different forms of literacy, and it split the community into factions. Also, you don't want a linguist designing a writing system, generally speaking. Linguists are taught phonemics, and they want to have a unique symbol for every phoneme in the language. That's not necessary, actually, and that's not even a good system. I'm struggling with Vietnamese right now, which is, it's over-differentiated. There's too many symbols, actually. If native speakers design their own orthography, they often do a better job of it than linguists do, because they encode just the minimal necessary information that one would need to understand what's written. Yes. So you know, and then how do we provide accessibility to people who do not read or write to a platform like the Talking Dictionary? So we've done many dictionaries for languages that do not use literacy or only very limited way. Our dictionaries are very visual, they're very pictorial. They have, you know, any cultural artifact or animal or plant that is named in the dictionary, there will be a photograph from that community. So I think it's fairly accessible. I even did some, I updated some of the icons. So in order to listen to something, you have an ear icon, not the little weird triangle thing that represents a speaker. You have an ear, right? For speaking, you have a mouth. So it's accessible in its signage and iconography. And we've had many interesting sessions, and I think productive sessions, where we pair up an elder speaker with a younger speaker, and the elder speaker provides the knowledge and the information, and the younger speaker technologizes it, writes it up, and uploads it into the dictionary. So you can have a partnership between someone who is literate and someone who is not. So these are all really important questions. I think I probably shouldn't take up much more of your lunchtime, but I would be happy to stay around for informal conversations, and thank you for being such a great audience. Okay? Okay?
Oh, nice.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, of course. Isabel.